Well, hello, DeWanda.
Hi, Corinne.
It is so great to meet you. We're both NAMI advocates, ambassadors. We've been working really closely with them for a long time, but we have not actually ever met or connected,
No,
which seems
right.
crazy.
Well, this is very cool. It's one of the small side effects of this moment, just people being able to connect in non-traditional ways.
Yeah,
So yeah, I'm really glad to be here with you.
yeah, and
Mhm.
really quick before we kind of jump into the conversation, right
Mhm.
before we got on, you were sharing with me, why working with NAMI and being in the mental health space is so important to you and where that came from, and that it actually has been something that's been or felt true to you for so long since you were
Very
really
long,
young. Yeah.
very long. I actually, okay, so I told you the piece, I think a lot of folks know now that I used to want to be a therapist, and I still play therapist to my friends, which is something I'm working on because it's important to practice boundaries and not pretend to be a therapist to your friends. But it all stemmed from being a very emotionally porous kid.
Yeah.
You ever see Secret Life of Bees?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
Do you remember Sophie Okonedo's character in Secret Life of Bees?
Oh, I don't know. I saw it so long ago. I mean, it must have been
Basically,
okay.
she felt like glass.
Oh.
Like she felt like her emotions felt like glass, and it was so beautiful. But I was a very I have high emotional access still. So that was before I wanted to be a therapist. That was the kind of inception of it. It was like in a pursuit of understanding my own emotions and
Mhm.
myself, and what was happening, internally.
Right.
What about you?
I actually have an anxiety disorder, and
Hmm.
I was diagnosed when I was 14.
Hmm.
And that's kind of a common time for mental health conditions to show up between the ages of 14 and 24. So it was right on schedule.
Yeah.
And my experience was I was feeling really anxious in class and had sweaty palms and heart palpitations, all of the common symptoms of anxiety. And
Hmm.
I went to my parents, saying, "Hey, I don't feel great." And I actually experienced a little bit of pushback. I'm biracial, so my mom is white
Hmm.
and my dad's black. From my black side of my family, it was something that, like, we don't really normally talk about mental health stuff.
Yeah.
And I mean, I feel like I've had such an opportunity working with NAMI to change that dialogue in my own family and really see them change and being so much more open to talking about how they're feeling. And I have mental health conditions run in my family,
Hmm.
and all opening this dialogue. But so yeah, anyways, and that led me to NAMI and working with them like the last 3 or 4 years now, which has been so rewarding. And I feel like I've seen the landscape change for mental health. I don't know about you, if you've noticed
Yeah.
that there's so much more um, there's so much more conversations being had that
Yeah.
were not being had when I even started working with them 3 or 4 years ago.
I agree. I totally agree. I think like when I started working with them around, I was working on She's Gotta Have It at the time, and it was like a lot of it was about trauma and like the aftermath, and anxiety attacks and all this stuff. And it was like I remember it being such a big deal at the moment. Like there were articles written about, a Black girl going to therapy,
Wow.
you know and I know they did the same thing on Insecure. Like there were shows in the last several years where there are steps kind of moving forward towards, at the very least, showing the various ways in which we can like access care,
Mm-hmm.
like Black women specifically can access care. How are you doing in this time, in the midst of
All of what's going
COVID and
on.
uprisings and an election year? And how are you
Oh
doing?
yeah, yeah. No, it's been. I definitely went through a period where it felt like it was all too much,
Hmm.
and really had to hone in on my coping skills that I've developed in therapy for so long and really just be so strict about them, because this is a lot of information and it's everywhere and it's all the time. But also I think, you know, with kind of this whole revolution happening in the Black community, I wasn't prepared for all the trauma that was going to come up by, I mean, generational trauma just of my, I think, ancestors and all of that, that's just like in my DNA, just coming in. And it still is overwhelming. But it's, you know, it's a good thing as well.
Yeah, for sure. I am well because I have to be well. I did same thing. I think I've tripled down on my coping things. I've had to like bump them way up, and just be really kind of radically present, like radically just moment to moment, you know, and allowing myself to be in whatever space that I'm actually in, and to remember to call my friends and call my mom and not to just, you know, sit in it. I think what's been interesting overall, just like in my community, like, you know, with my very best friends, with some of my like closest, is watching Black women navigate this moment and kind of figure out their like what role they want to take on or are willing to take on or can take on. Just because, you know, in my experience, I feel like the like coronavirus had already limited my bandwidth. Like I was already on like no chill. Like I was already like, there's no patience, right? So I was already there. So then when like May and June hit, I just realized like I'm far more direct. Like if I did decide, okay, I'm gonna have the grace to, you know, be a teacher to white folks in this moment, right? That it wasn't like, I didn't have the same kind of like tact or cloak, right? And I found from what I've seen and, you know, what I've like heard from my friends too, that's like kind of, that's the moment. Like this kind of construct of, oh, you know, we're caregivers and we're educators and, you know, we are all these kind of like roles that have been really quite detrimental to our like mental health in many ways, are kind of being dismantled, or at least at the very least like examined, you know, and evaluated.
It's kind of like you're putting the oxygen mask on somebody else before you put it on yourself. And I agree with you in terms of the current climate of everything that's happening, feeling like I caught myself so much stepping into that teacher role, which, you know, Black women are teachers and they're caregiver, like you were just saying. And I had to check in like, oh, is this now affecting my mental health? Because I'm feeling so drained. And so, you know, I have so many people reaching out to me because they, you know, they're trying to do the right thing and contact their local Black person, you know,
right.
You know, which is so great, but also, you know, was overwhelming to some degree. But yeah, I agree with you that I think it does allow an opportunity for us to reevaluate those constructs that we've been so closely tied in. And, you know, I hope for older generations, and, you know, my grandmother and all of them are also feeling the freedom to step out of those roles too now.
Yeah. It's been really fun watching the last couple of years. My mom has kind of taken a sort of ownership over her, really over her sanity, you know, because like a lot of Black women, she has all the stuff like high blood pressure, you know, like anything that's basically stress induced, you know, all that runs in my family, because they're stressed out. So it's, you know, it's been really lovely and remarkable to see her kind of internalized a very simple truth, which is, you know, you can only give what you have.
Mm.
And the process of, you know, depleting ourselves for the sake of maintaining whatever, for the sake of maintaining some like notion of universal strength, you know, a la strong Black woman or whatever, it costs too much.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Growing up, what was your experience with self-care and or in your family, the conversation for mental health? Like, was it completely not there? Was
I
it?
think it was like, it was fairly cloaked in shame. I mean, just overall, like mental health aside, just the notion of like feelings, you know, feelings are frowned upon. And really kind of, you know, thankfully, I pretty early on, like my mom is everything. My mom was just this kind of, she's actually going to talk soon on like what it means to like raise a creative kid or whatever. And she should, everyone should listen to mama talk about that, because she really allowed a lot of space for my feelings. But, you know, in terms of like my extended family and also just the community at large, you know, it was kind of like, especially growing up like in and outside of Baltimore, that the notion of strength looked very, you know, prototypically masculine, or cliche masculine. And you know, it was just very like finite. It was very narrow, very finite. You know, no one, on one hand, like when I think about it as an adult, you know, there's something beautiful in a certain quality of restraint and not like spilling over
Right.
your stuff and not projecting. So I think, you know, on one hand, I definitely learned that. But then on the other hand, you know, there were ways that I had to really grow in communicating my needs, and just figuring out, you know, my needs for myself. And there were things that I just did quite naturally growing up. Like my mom journaled, so I journaled.
Oh, I love journaling.
It's huge. That
Yeah.
was huge for me
That's
growing up.
great to learn at a young age.
Yeah. I was like, I feel like that's probably been the most consistent form of care. And then, you know, I mean, it can be such an interesting kind of catch-22 being an actor, because on one hand, you know, for me, it's always been exceptionally cathartic, at least like, especially when I get to work on stuff where, you know, I'm just pouring my soul out.
Yeah.
And then on the other hand, you're like, now, you know, you have to navigate the industry stuff, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Completely. And I agree with you in being an actor and it being this cathartic experience. But also, yeah, it's kind of like we were saying growing up, you have to find that balance of like, where can I spill myself and where do I have to be a professional and show up and being so aware of that in this space. But we're very lucky that we do have this healthy outlet.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially during this time, I feel like relying on your creativity and as much as you can to kind of hone in all these feelings that are coming up that feel like they're just hitting you at different times of the day.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you feel any like, it's partially, you know, your identity and being biracial, but do you feel any pressure to like fulfill or be, or like, is there a pervasive kind of point of view on Black womanhood that you're confronted with? Does that make any sense?
Being biracial, you mean?
No, just being a Black woman and just like, just feeling like, okay, I'm expected to, people think that this thing is gonna be the thing and then it's something else.
You know, I think for me, because at a young age, I experienced anxiety and I was very I came forth with my parents very early, and I was talking about it very early. I feel like I didn't feel that need to feel like I'm put together and strong all the time. Like I feel
It's
like I was
beautiful.
really in touch with my vulnerability, and maybe that was because I was a creative kid too, and I love to write and act, and I wasn't afraid of that side of me.
Yeah.
But I do think that my family wasn't used to that or used to seeing that. And it did take some time, especially when I started working with NAMI. And one of the first things I did with them was I wrote this article for Refinery 29 about growing up with anxiety. And I remember my family being like, the night before it went live, you sure you want to put that out?
Because it feels like an indictment to them.
Yeah, they're like, you sure? And I was like, yes. And I think they will agree now. And I definitely do that was one of the best things I ever did. And I will say that the second I put that article out, so many Black girls reached out to me, and they were like, thank you for saying something. Thank you for coming. And it was just like, I was flooded with all of this. And I was just like, wow, there's such a need for this conversation. There's such a need to lay down your arms and say, hey, I'm vulnerable. Hey, I experienced this too. And so I think us even having these types of conversation really break down those barriers and those constructs that we've been tied to for so long.
Yeah. What do you hope comes of the present movement in terms of mental health advocacy?
Well, I mean, you kind of talked about this a little bit before we got on this Zoom, but about, defunding the police, what that really means. And it's really putting money back into communities that have been ignored for so long. And I hope that mental health services are so much more available in Black communities, and it's normalized because it's available everywhere. And it's not just for the wealthy anymore, the white wealthy anymore.
Right.
What about you?
I have so many hopes and dreams. Like if I were a billionaire right now, here's what I would do.
Exactly.
No, I worked in Vancouver. And every time I work anywhere, I love cities. I love learning about each city. And drivers are always my favorite. And I don't know if that's partially a family history thing. I don't know what it is, but I just love drivers. I love talking to drivers. So the prevailing conversation, Vancouver has had this huge mental health institution, and it just shut down. And they just let people out on the street.
Wow.
So there were people, there were droves of people who would just jump out in the middle of the street. My driver slowed down and I was like, why are you slowing down this much? This is crazy. And he was like, oh, folks would just jump out so that they can get so that they can go to a hospital for a weekend, so they can have access to something else. But it was all because this need that this community had no longer existed. And anytime I think about, our justice system, the rates of incarceration, how many people are there who actually need mental health services and don't need to be locked up, it's enough to break me open every time. And so I feel like I'm necessarily optimistic about this time, because I just feel like things have to change. Mental health for vulnerable communities, for communities of color, for Black folks is, it sits at, the crossroads of so many things. And it's wild, because I feel like, even this moment, what I'm feeling right now is we're fighting for change. And there is this very simple very simple thing we're fighting for, right? When you talk about like police violence, police brutality. And it's just the start. And that's what's wild, you know, it's just the very, very beginning because, you know, there's so many systems and so many advocates who are going to need help after this, so many healthcare workers who are going to need mental care after this.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, they are superheroes. Truly,
Yeah.
truly.
Yeah.
No, I love your sense of optimism about this because I feel like I teeter every day between, you know, and that's part of my own anxiety is just like teetering in a space of this is, you know, there's so much change that is going to come from this. And I do believe that. And then also feeling completely battered by the
Of
news.
course.
And so it's just like you're constantly in between, at least for me. And so to hear you, I mean, immediately say, I have so many hopes and dreams. If I had $1 billion, I would tell you.
Listen.
But I love that
I mean,
because I think that's the headspace we have to continue to be in because, I mean, for me, one of my coping tools is limiting the news and really knowing like how much I can process at a time and like being able to digest it and then feel active. I know we're kind of running out of time here, but what are some actionable steps you think we can all take to further, you know, mental health opportunities in Black communities and keep the conversation going so that we can get to this dream?
Yeah. I feel like, you know, one thing, you know, why I partnered with NAMI from the beginning is because the model of the grassroots model, you know, there are local branches. A lot of times when I work with them, I work in LA for the LA County branch. And, you know, just having that kind of tactile, now it's online, obviously, but access to just, you know, all the resources available. And I think one thing that I love about what's happening right now too is there's just this kind of share of information, like, you know, that, you know, wasn't necessarily happening before. And a lot of Black mental health advocates and Black women are sort of like, you know, speaking for our own communities. And that's just, you know, it's dope. It's very necessary. And also in the last several years, which has only been accelerated by the last couple of months, I just love that the conversation is kind of moving past like self-care.
Right.
Like for a second, it was like, you know, we had to be cute with it.
Yeah.
You know, we had to be like real cute with it. Like, this is how you do a facial at home, you know? Speaking literally for myself, I've done that. Moving on to like, no, girl, for real, you need a therapist. Stop playing around.
I love that. Yeah. Yeah. It's not all just like fuzzy socks and like, you know, your little
It's work.
Yeah. And you know what you're saying about the information sharing, you know, social media can be testy for mental health, but I have seen, at least maybe that's just the algorithm that I'm in, but you know, so many more things about trauma and identifying patterns and all of this information. You have to be, you know, wary about where you're getting our info from. But I agree that I think that the conversation's changing to actually getting, you know, working through stuff and making healthy habits.
Yeah.
Opposed to just, you know, feeling cozy at home, which is great. You have to have both.
Which is great.
You got to do it.
And I also, to that point, I love that, you know, for those who are like able or whatever, you know, early conversations talk about detrimental to mental health or whatever, but early conversations about like, oh, you know, COVID-19 and da-da-da-da-da, it kind of segued to like, my mom walks now. My mom wasn't walking. My mom, like, you know, she needs to get out the house. She's an extrovert or whatever. So she like goes on these walks and, you know, just being out in the sun has like lifted her mood. And, you know, more of my friends actually, like friends who do not work out, have started to just like, you know, use Headspace. Like Headspace is
Oh, I
free
love
right now for anybody who's unemployed, you
Oh,
know.
that's awesome. I didn't know that.
They did that, like, they started that like a month and a half ago, I think.
Oh,
So I just find that, you know, more of my friends are kind of like figuring out, you know, between, I mean, all of it, all the things. Mine are,
less distractions now, you know. I
yeah,
mean, there's a lot going on, but you're at home, and I think you can't run away from, you know, your issues and your feelings anymore. We've had to really sit with them, and I think people are taking a look like, okay, this is where I need to do work, or this is how I have to take care of myself to get through this time and space, this
right.
unique version of life that is 2020.
I know. It's its own. It will be its own. It's gonna be like in every textbook. Doesn't matter. Earth science in that. Math
Yeah.
in that too.
Be everywhere. Well, we are kind of, I think, at the end of time, but I just want to say it's so great connecting with you and just hearing your experience and your take on this, and your positivity about all of this, which I just need to keep remembering so that I don't
Gotta
go
keep
down the
it.
rabbit hole. But yeah, I think we should also just acknowledge it is a hard time for everyone. I think people who even don't have a mental health condition are experiencing depression or
Yeah,
anxiety for the first time.
yeah,
And just letting anybody who's watching this know that there's so many resources. NAMI.org has the hookup on anything you need to know. And then also just feeling free to have these conversations like we're having with
yeah,
family, friends, whoever. Just opening up that communication will really do wonders.
yeah. I agree, like wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
Um, Thanks for listening, strangers
Hi,
on the
this is
internet.
awesome. We'll have to connect again and do this again when you're back from London.
Yeah,
We'll have
yeah,
to get lunch or something when we
totally.
can in
When we can.
2022.
Yeah,
But I'm looking forward to it.
me too. It's nice to meet you, Corinne.
You too. Have a good one.
You too.
All right, bye.
Bye.